that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
A new day for the country, for Texas, and for Houston. George Bush takes the oath of office as the 41st President of the United States. A Texan in the White House, surrounded by Texans. Nearly a third of his cabinet members call Texas home. Tonight, an examination of this new administration, of its deep roots in the Lone Star State and the likely effects it will have on Texas and on Houston.
Texans in the White House, a KHOU 11 News special. Now, reporting live from our nation's capital, Steve Smith and Sylvan Rodriguez.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining Sylvan and me on this inaugural night.
Steve, what an inaugural it was today. A big day for the Lone Star State, a big day for Houston as the nation's capital swelled with thousands of Texans, hundreds of Houstonians, all coming here to the nation's capital for a big day. Pageantry with a Texas flair. The Aggies were here, the Longhorn Band was here. They're all here. They all strutted their stuff on this first day for the new administration.
We will be sharing the Texas side of this event with you during the next 30 minutes or so. We'll hear from some of the Texans who will be making up the Bush cabinet. We'll share some of the excitement of the social scene going on here tonight, and we'll take a reading of what Houston can expect from these Texans in the White House. First, the fun. There are 9 different inaugural balls happening here in Washington tonight. Folks, that is a lot of dancing, of course. Most people from our part of the country are attending the ball at the Air and Space Museum. Philip Bruce has been rubbing shoulders with the movers and the shakers over there. He's standing by live now outside the Air and Space Museum. Phil, how's the ball circuit over there?
Well, it's a lot warmer over there than it is right here, Steve. I can tell you that for sure. George Bush has been a very busy man on his first official night as president. He's been crisscrossing Washington trying to attend as many of those balls as he can in his honor this evening. One of the hottest tickets in town was, as you mentioned, that ball at the Air and Space Museum. That's where all of the Texans were, and that's where George Bush and Barbara made a point of stopping by just to take one last dance for their supporters. Many of these Republicans have been with the Bushes since George was a Houston congressman, and tonight it was a real celebration for all of them to be back together as George Bush prepares to move into the White House. Sylvan?
All right, Phil, thank you very much. You know, it was an absolutely beautiful day. Throughout the day, the weather seemed to be partisan Republican. Sunny during the outdoor activities and then just cool enough so the ladies could wear their furs in the evening. But George Bush made it clear that he will look to the heavens during the next 4 years for guidance. His first official stop of the day was St. Martin's Episcopal Church. His first official act as president, a prayer.
Heavenly Father, we bow our heads and thank you for your love.
In fact, the entire speech reflected a gentle outlook, a vision that requires not so much change as kindness.
I take as my guide the hope of a saint. In crucial things, unity. In important things, diversity. In all things, generosity.
And it was a message Texans enjoyed hearing.
Pretty impressive. I think he's going to have a good 4 years.
I think he's searching out a new direction for the country, and I think that he'll succeed in it.
Oh, I thought it was remarkable. It was very moving. I was crying. It was just very touching. Everyone around us, and when we sang our Star Spangled Banner, it was just wonderful.
Throughout the last 3 days, George and Barbara Bush have been cracking jokes about each other. In carrying through on this spirit of spontaneity, they left their limousine to walk the parade route. A smiling First Lady proudly waved the hook'em horns. The Bushes were having fun on the biggest day of their lives. But in truth, this day began in Houston, the city they call home, the city tapped for so many administration leaders. The Bush whirlwind made its presence felt many times in Houston.
And when I thought about what we're to say what I'm about to say, there was really only one choice where to say it. I had to come here, to my home, to Texas. And this is where I've come to say the most important words of my life. I am here today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
More than a year before he was to achieve that goal, the man who became president today traveled to southeast Texas to the place he calls home, Houston. There, among lifelong friends, he gave official status to a quest to which he's dedicated much of his adult life. A public life that has found him returning again and again to Houston, just as he did during the long campaign.
Thank you all very much. We got to vote. I got to vote for somebody.
Back home for Super Tuesday, the Southern mega primary that was supposed to reunite the old, solid Democratic South. Watching the numbers unfold that night in Houston, it was apparent that Bush's party had united behind him, rewarding his years of service to it, to Ronald Reagan, and to the nation.
Bush's extraordinary win comes just a month after his embarrassing defeat in Iowa at the hands of Bob Dole.
Soon, Dole, Robertson, Kemp were inevitably falling in behind the Texas Republican steamroller. Home again in June, sweet irony, a Houston Republican running for president, recalling the early 60s when this state Republican convention might have been held in a large phone booth.
But I remember plodding around the precincts in Harris County and building and working with a lot of you here.
And just as it elected him its first modern-day Republican congressman nearly a quarter century ago, Harris County went solidly for the 41st president in November, as did the country. Election night, home again, savoring an overwhelming victory among friends and supporters, among Houstonians.
I thank all the people throughout America who have given us this great victory. And I thank Ronald Reagan.
And tonight here in Washington, that Californian Ronald Reagan, who started George Bush on the road to the presidency 9 years ago, has gone home to California, and turned over the reins of the most powerful nation in the world to that man, that Houstonian, George Bush. You know, Sylvan, 4 of the 14 Bush cabinet members are going to be from Texas.
That is amazing. And when we come back, we'll hear from those men who will help shape this nation during the next 4 years. Stay with us.
Every president who has come into this powerful office in Washington has gone out among his own to select the men and women who will help him run the nation for the next 4 years. For the former president, of course, that meant bringing in Californians. For the man who's been president for about half a day now, it meant Texans, a lot of Texans, including a couple of old political and personal pals.
Washington hasn't gotten a taste of Texas this week. It's gotten a mouthful. Witness today's inaugural parade, where Longhorns and Aggies led the way. The pecking order here has just shifted, and for the next 4 years, Texas is on top. But it isn't all boots and cowboy hats. The important changes are happening behind the scenes. In the Bush cabinet, 4 of the incoming secretaries are Texans. John Tower at the Defense Department, Laurel Cavazos at Education, and the 2 others are from Houston. James Baker, the longtime friend who ran Bush's campaign, takes over at the State Department. Of the 4, Baker is the closest to the president, a veteran of Bush's first presidential race.
I remember when we started the campaign in 1979, I remember the articles about KHOU. I remember George Bush being an asterisk in the polls. I remember people telling me, as a matter of fact, at the time, why are you doing this? I had just completed a tour as President Gerald Ford's campaign manager in his campaign against Jimmy Carter in 1976, and many people came up to me and said, why are you associating yourself with someone who's totally unknown as a candidate for president instead of some of these people who are out there running who are much better known? So there's a great sense of satisfaction in seeing this happen.
Robert Mosbacher is another longtime friend who was George Bush's chief fundraiser. Like Bush, he left a privileged life to build his own fortune in the oil fields of Texas. Now, as Secretary of Commerce, Mosbacher says reviving the oil industry is one of his main concerns.
there's a president who understands the industry and understands the importance to America, and the fact that if we don't have a healthy domestic oil industry, our national security can be in real jeopardy, and he understands that and feels strongly about it. So I think the viewpoint of Texas and the oil industry will be heard.
George Bush says he will also listen to the educators of America. And this week in Washington, he started with a luncheon for outstanding teachers.
I'm very glad that you've come to these inaugural celebrations. And, of course, I'm glad to be the guy who gets to say that he's glad. So,
At his side, Secretary of Education Laurel Cavazos, who came here from Texas Tech under Ronald Reagan and remains in the new Bush team. Cavazos is a sixth-generation Texan, but he says it's important to remember that all of the Texans here have to take a national view.
I think that you must remember that appointments to these kinds of jobs they really ask of us a total commitment to everyone, to this entire nation. And I think you can, certainly we're all very, very proud of our background, proud of our state. When I make a decision about education, though, I've got to really think about the entire nation.
Well, the message we've been getting here is pretty clear. George Bush may be from Houston, but he wasn't elected president of Texas, so don't expect any special favors. But on the flip side of that, George Bush and all of these cabinet members know what Texas is all about, and if there are any special problems there, they ought to be able to deal with them or help people deal with them. You know, if the mayor of Navasota calls with a problem, no one here is going to have to go to a map and find out where Navasota is. Sylvan?
Well, apparently, Phil, I can't hear what you're saying over there, but it has been a remarkable day here in D.C. Most people know Texans as folks who like to party and party long. That reputation developed in 1981 at the inaugural balls then, and reinforced then in 1985, and it appears, Steve, that the trend is continuing. Texans do know how to party.
I'm kind of disappointed, one, that I'm going home tomorrow, and two, I'm not going to get a chance to go to that black tie and boots
Now,
ball.
that one should be a lot of fun.
That's going to be
Tickets were, that was the hardest ball to get tickets to.
I didn't try. I probably would have been disappointed anyway. A lot of partying going on tonight. We'll go back to Phil in just a bit.
And we'll have a report on just how the boost to the Houstonian social scene all these Texans in the White House have provided. We hope you stay with us. Well, the celebrating is still going on here at the nation's capital for all of the 1,000 Republicans who have come here to help George Bush celebrate this most important day for him. Right now, let's check back with Phil Bruce, who's at a very important Texas ball right now. Phil, from the sounds of it, sounds like fun.
Well, Sylvan, the real important thing, the real special thing, I think, about this ball is that so many of these people were with George Bush from the very beginning, when not many people were giving him credit for being much of a candidate at all. We talked to David McDavid tonight. He's a car dealer, has dealerships in Texas, throughout Texas and Dallas and Houston. He said back in '64 he loaned George Bush a car when the Bush was running for the Senate. He said back then it was pretty hard to loan a Republican anything, but obviously those days have changed. I guess there's a great deal of satisfaction on the part of these Republicans to feel that they were right. They feel that they were with the right man all along, and tonight it was a very sweet occasion for them to be together after fighting that long battle. Sylvan?
All right, this is Steve. Phil, I talked to some of the same kinds of people you did all day today over at the inauguration. They all said the same thing. I've known George Bush since the 60s. This is a culmination of something we've been working for a long, long time. You know, the social world here in Washington certainly has touched off a good deal of excitement back home in Houston, too. Susan Banks reports a lot of folks with a personal interest in it are hoping all this is not going to go away soon.
He sells them, she buys them, and she reports on all that buying and selling. Houston has had a good case of inaugural fever for weeks.
When we were in market early fall, we anticipated Mr. Bush winning the election, and we bought in that direction.
The folks at Isabel Gerhardt's clothing store were so convinced that George Bush would win the presidency in November that they started ordering their incredibly expensive custom gowns many weeks before the election.
It's not something like a hardware piece that you call the supplier and say send over something. They have to be made especially for who buys them because of the price.
The price? anywhere from $350 to $2,000. The Gerhardts have sold 200 of them. And how about these inauguration shoes at Neiman Marcus? Special order, $1,200. A woman in New Mexico bought a pair. Extravagant? Maybe. But then it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Very costly, but it's worth it.
Ninfa Lorenzo had to have 4 dresses for 4 different occasions. How much? Don't ask.
We buy within our means, but for something like that, it's a once-in-a-lifetime deal. So,
and you're
you
worth
go
it?
for it.
And you're worth it?
Yes.
Here's a tidbit. Don't breathe a word, but Ninfa's maneuvering to start a Mexican restaurant in D.C. She'd like to make sure that there's good salsa on every lip. Did you hear that, Maxine Messenger?
Well, I think Texas itself will be on a lot more lips than it has been before.
Fine, but is Houston going to see some benefits? What with the Houston Moss backers there and our new president hailing from here?
George Bush really doesn't live here. He hasn't lived here for a long, long time. And I think that the Moss backers, who are wonderful, Georgette has never lived in Houston that long.
But still, her husband, our new Secretary of Commerce, is from here, and she's a social powerhouse. Shouldn't Houston get some benefit?
I don't know why it would change. Why would it change in Houston? Because these people are in Washington. They're not going to be in Houston. I think we're going to see a lot of benefits for Texas. And I think we're going to see benefits in the oil industry, benefits in industries coming here. I think we're going to see tremendous benefits that don't have to do with going to a cocktail party.
And that's the latest from Houston's premier gossip columnist. Susan Banks, 11 News.
Something tells me it's not the latest from Maxine.
Folks, we got to tell you that it's cold up here in Washington, but the ladies who are here are very glad for it. They get a chance to wear their fur coats, and up here the Rolexes are so common they're being referred to by the Texans, of course, as Texas Timexes.
Up here from our viewpoint, of course, we can see a good deal of the traffic and a couple of the parties lined up and the folks lined up for the parties. I have to tell you, we've talked about the positive aspects of this, but this town's been in gridlock now for about 2 days. Almost impossible to move around, and I suspect that's very frustrating for some of the Texans used to wide open spaces.
Oh, even the cab drivers are complaining they can't make any money with this kind of traffic.
Well, Bush versus Reagan, how will the presidential image change? We'll be back with that.
Stay with us.
As we're about to be blown off the roof of this building, of course, we can comfortably predict that with a Texan in the White House, a Houstonian in the White House, obviously public relations for Houston and for Texas are bound to improve. But how about some other things, especially how about the business aspects of all this? Marlene McClinton has that.
The Bush administration is starting out with a full tank. The price of West Texas Intermediate crude oil topping the $19 a barrel mark. Experts think Bush's past oil experience could bode well for the industry, so vital to Houston.
I think that the incoming president will take further steps to, number one, deregulate prices further, and number two, to put in place some type of drilling incentives for natural gas.
The administration made a point of giving a small business a shot at printing the inauguration T-shirts and intimated it'll be paying attention to this group's needs. That's especially good news for minority entrepreneurs.
A lot of people have the feeling that Bush may be like Nixon in that the door will be open for opportunities for minority-owned businesses, and he will push to make sure those opportunities are expanded.
Bush spent quite a bit of time courting Texas during the election, bringing the national spotlight. Now he's installed a number of Texans in high-powered White House jobs, but that may not translate into political power.
I don't think Republicans, or for that matter Democrats, are inherently advantaged because George Bush was elected to the presidency or because George Bush claims this as his home. Their advantage comes through the interaction of having a very powerful and strong and cooperative state delegation.
There is no way to crystal ball just how George Bush will feed his adopted roots here in Houston. But by appointing so many Texans to such prominent positions, he has assured us that those roots will not just wither away, while he's in Washington. Marlene McClinton, 11 News.
You know, for the last 8 years, Ronald Reagan has been portrayed as the man who sits tall in the saddle, who always shoots straight, speaks softly, the man who has snugly wrapped himself in the mantle of patriotism and family values. Well, that was an image in large part, but now George Bush has assumed that office. That presidential image, to a large extent, may become real. Ronald Reagan rode into office on a horse painted red, white, and blue, but it was George Bush who not only saw combat action, but was the youngest pilot in the Navy.
I volunteered on June 12th, 1942. That was my 18th birthday. I had to wait because I wanted to be a pilot.
He became a military hero when he completed a bombing run in 1944 after his plane was hit.
And about halfway down, one of these black clusters of anti-aircraft fire must have hit me because the plane went surging forward. I felt this jolt. I could see the fire all around, anti-aircraft. And then suddenly my plane was on fire.
His crew died, but Bush was rescued by a nearby submarine. It was Ronald Reagan who talked about family values, but pictures of the Reagan family together are rare. The family dog accompanied the Reagans to the ranch.
And I want to talk about my family. Fact is, I'd be nothing without them.
Expect to see the Bush children and grandchildren roaming the White House grounds. And while Reagan was one of only a few presidents to not attend church regularly, expect to see the Bush family at Sunday services. Political analysts are impressed with the Bush cabinet appointees. No newcomers from Wall Street here. Instead, professional, old Washington hands with less rhetoric and ideology. Even Democrats are optimistic.
Much more cooperative spirit between the White House and the Congress.
And while Bush will never be the great communicator, he could bridge differences in old-fashioned ways. Expect to see horseshoe games in the backyard of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
You know, Sylvan, I got a chance to visit with Bob Mosbacher, the next Secretary of Commerce, with Jim Baker, the next Secretary of State. Of course, these guys have been with Bush forever, for 25, 30 years. Very satisfied, of course, with what happened here today. Today at the inauguration, I was watching as Mr. Bush was taking the oath of office. Jack Raines, the Texas Secretary of State, a gruff, bluff kind of guy. You know, a big, heavy-spoken fella. The tears were rolling down his cheeks.
Something?
Here's a fellow who's been working with George Bush for a long, long time. It was the moving moment of this event. I'm sure he doesn't mind my telling the story.
You know what I thought, Steve? I thought that there was Ronald Reagan, the great communicator. He had not one word to say today, and of course that's because that's the way the process is. We're going from jelly beans to pork rinds, and I began to wonder if the Bush administration was not going to be like the weather we had today, bright and sunny to begin with, and then it became wintry, it became cold, it became very windy. And he is going to be compared to Ronald Reagan at some point. How long his honeymoon lasts? Well, time will only tell.
Well, you know, that's a tough act to follow. Ronald Reagan is the most popular president we've had probably since FDR, certainly since Ike. And he comes in with some heavy problems, of course, chief among them being the budget deficit. He mentioned it today. I was kind of surprised he did mention it, in fact, with Reagan sitting there.
Right.
But he did. He said he's going to have to tackle it, and it's going to be a giant job for him to undertake.
Well, he also mentioned that he wanted, again, the gentle, more gentle, a kinder nation. And so George Bush is off. He had a wonderful day today, and now we'll see what the next 4 years hold.
We thank you for joining us. We'll see you back in Houston on Monday. Goodbye from Washington.
Good night.